let's get into the book. But we're gonna do something a little different because there's only a couple of us. And by a couple, I mean more than two, but a handful. And I want to, if you have the book in front of you, if you're able to access the book right now, let's go straight to page, I'm sorry, I should have had this ready. Let's go straight to page 99, or one would call it 100, where the photos begin, yeah? I want us to try to figure out a little bit, focus on these photos, particularly because Cheryl will be joining us next week. And I'm sure there are so many questions we have surrounding her words and her relationship to even being able to make this work. But automatically when I saw those photos, I was so excited because I was like, I know what these photos are saying to me. I wonder what other folks are picking up from them. So again, if you're able to get to page 100, we can start on the photo on the left-hand side, where there's two photos. There's Cheryl and Malik in Queens in 1972. And then there's one of Malik again in 1972, sucking his finger. And I would love to hear just anything that's coming to mind now as you're looking at these photos, or maybe you saw them before. Does it remind you? Do you have photos like this? Anything that's coming to mind. I know that for me, in the first one, I have one where my mother and I are almost mimicking that exact same pose, where I'm on the bed looking to the side and she's kissing me from the corner. I'm referring to this one.
I'm sorry, what page are the photos on?
Oh, no problem. Page 99, 100.
Okay. You got it.
Okay.
Well, I would say a loving family. That's what stands out for me. So proud to be taking pictures as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And their smiles are just so genuine and so sweet.
Mm-hmm. I think what really stood out to me emotionally as well, naming that they seem loving. Anais is, this picture of him sucking his thumb. I just think about my mother and the maternal figures in my life. Like, I can grow up and have an entire career and, with blessings and protection. But if there's a possibility where, like, I don't outlive my family, I know that they're always going to see me like this, right? Like, it doesn't matter what I do or how old I am or how long we live. I know I'm always seen kind of in this way. Y'all know what I'm trying to, y'all understand my sentiment, what I'm trying to say? Okay. I feel very young in the face saying this, but just the idea of like, oh, right. And maybe it's because I don't have any children or anything right now, but I understand that, oh yeah, I am a child, even though I'm clearly an adult. Does that make sense?
Yes, you'll always be a child to those older than you. Yeah.
Yes, paternal or not. And that felt like, it feel an awesome role to play, and I feel bad for Phife for not being able to still be that,
Looking at the picture reminds me of my brother. He was a thumb sucker, and he was at probably the most relaxed state, when he had his thumb. It was like a sense of security with the thumb.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We also see in this next picture, this beautiful family portrait. Also, I'm really happy with the decision about it being black and white. What about y'all? What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, way back then, yeah.
They may have just been black and white.
Right.
That's true too.
Is that the father with the big afro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Walt.
Yeah, that's Walt.
Mm-hmm.
And on the next page, we see Cheryl and Malik in Queens a year later in 1973. And then we see him at his 4th birthday, a little bit later in 1974. And I was really captured by the next image on the next page, which was Phife and his father, Walt, at an album release party for Low End Theory in 91.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a different image of the father
Exactly.
from the 1970s look.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see that smile, that sense of pride, though. You know.
Yeah, so that's
Mhm.
almost 20 years later, almost. Or is
Mhm.
it?
Yes.
And just to go back with the picture with the family, it's nice to see a picture with a family, with a mother and a father in a home. Back then, a lot
Mhm.
of Black and brown families, kids were raised in homes that were single parent homes. So it's nice to see a mom, a dad, and a child in a picture in that time.
Absolutely gorgeous portrait. And he got everyone got their picture clothes on. You know what I'm saying? Y'all know the picture clothes.
Mhm.
Okay. Taking many pictures in a Sears and in photo studios all over the Bronx. If we turn the page, oh, this was a gorgeous, part of what I love about this book isn't poetry itself. I think those of us who love it, which is a lot of us in this space. I want to acknowledge Ron and I, like, thank you, but I feel like a lot of us in this space are into poetry. So I think maybe it's just a kindred group. But, poetry itself is an archive. And the fact that she's been able to sort of create this physical archive of her love to her son, and it also gives us as connoisseurs of maybe hip hop or music or Black culture or just of her work, it gives us a true archive of an iconic process. Like, this is Phife Dawg in the studio. I keep doing this. It's Phife Dawg in the studio in '94,
Yep, in his home too. It's in
in his
home.
home.
Yep.
What else is standing out to folks? In his home, yes.
That computer, that monitor.
Oh, baby. Baby, this is a box. A television itself.
Also, and she has what is it, like maybe a handful of pictures, like 6 or 7 pages. I mean, throughout your lifetime, I'm sure she had several pictures, but what made her pick these few pictures?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Absolutely.
you often wonder. I mean, these pictures, they also represent someone's memories, right? Some people that were able to afford to take pictures, because sometimes people were not able to afford to take pictures or even have a camera at that time. So I often talk to my mom and like ask her, like, oh, hey, you have pictures of so-and-so or whatever, or your dad or whatever when they were young. And it's like, no, back then we didn't have cameras, or we couldn't afford cameras, or so certain things you have to just appreciate in life that you're able to have. So these pictures show, okay, you had a camera, they were either black and white or whatever. And I mean, pictures are just valuable. That's how I look at them when I see these.
And it shows the different stages of his life too. When he was younger, him and his dad, him in his studio, him and his mom. I think they're on tour. And then that him later on, probably in a club. So as he's aging, and then him and his mother on stage together too. So that's very nice. And then him and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
So different stages of his life.
I like the photo touch, but it screams questions. And boy, as a parent that loses a child, I can't even imagine her putting these pictures and then like looking at them or looking at those little notes that he wrote, and then the whole process of my thought process when I was reading this was the fact that it's hard when you lose someone and you're just a normal person, right? But how about when you lose someone and you're famous? You constantly have to see this on TV. You constantly have to hear about it, or even people you walk the street and they know your son and they're like, oh, hi, Miss So-and-so. And that must be really difficult for her.
Absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of, because when you think about Phife's place in hip hop, it just reminds me of the constant media attention around Pac's mom and Biggie's mom, right? And the idea, particularly when it comes to this genre of culture, how moms are used to tell their story or their legacy. You know, traditionally, I feel like it's the idea that your children are your legacy and all these things. And I make this connection with these three artists and these three men because I don't know, because I'm listening to you now. And I feel like that is something to be said, that mothers in this odd way are often called to step up. It's part of the media grab. Maybe it just makes a better story coming from their mother, you know? I don't know. I'm posing it to y'all. But does anyone else see that? I also want to name something that was put in the chat. Liliana says, absolutely, there's a limited amount of pictures of my family and even of me as a child. And so I relive those memories through stories told. And I think that's an important point to name because in poetry itself, I think often the poet tries to paint that story, yeah? Maybe we can name that or agree on that. The poet tries to name or paint whatever description or detail they're trying to give you. And she's sort of saying at the end, all these things I've wrote and all these feelings I've shared with you, look at them, you know, look at them. And I see it as like a blessing, right? Like, oh, we get to experience it in that way. What do y'all think about the painting?
You know what's interesting about the three people that you just named, Biggie, Tupac, and Phife, is that their moms were all very articulate women. So it wasn't, so they kind of, I don't know about Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mom, because I know she did have her own personal problems that she was dealing with. But Biggie's mom was an educator, and Cheryl's a poet and educator. And I think that kind of helps the legacy of their children when they can speak eloquently about them, you know?
Absolutely. And I want to just name to the point about Afeni, while she may have had whatever issues, addiction and struggles, she was a Panther and she was an activist.
Yeah.
Right? So when we talk about articulate and in those ways, or in all ways, I agree with that statement completely. You're right. Their moms also had these personalities that cultivate this artist-like child, right? Like that's what makes an artist, I'd imagine. I do think about my mother. If something were to ever happen to me, I know it would be her voice the loudest, you know? I think about that.
But we did have a conversation.
I'm not saying I'm Biggie or Pac, everyone. Like, you know, I didn't say that. I'm just saying.
It's still
Sorry
time.
about it.
Still time. But we did have a conversation last week about how Cheryl sort of nurtured her son's artistic endeavors, you know, as opposed to what we may stereotypically think about Caribbean parents, you know, just wanting their children to get the job that has a retirement plan or that's sort of safe and secure. Cheryl really nurtured her son's desire to be, it seemed like any kind of artist, because he was also taking music lessons as a kid. But and Cheryl took him to her acting classes as he got older. But also, you know, just to be accepting of, you know, somebody who wants to be a poet or rapper is really like forward thinking. This is like 50, well, I think he was born in 1970. So, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was a foresight in her to cultivate that. Yeah. And because it isn't common or typical at the time. Absolutely. I love that connection, Ron. Thank you. Yeah. I don't know if anyone was going to pop in and say anything else. I was going to ask us to, please, let's finish moving through the pictures. We don't have to name each one. But as you move through and you see Phife on tour, Lollapalooza, and his flyer, and then him on the mic at the Bowery. Shout out to the Bowery, to the poets in the room. I did want to get to that picture of Phife and his mother on stage and share it with y'all. And someone just named how she used to go on stage. I mean, she used to bring him, right, to her theater. And I think that's just a beautiful moment to make that connection. And here he is having her on stage at the Bowery, you know.
Okay. I was at that performance. It was Mother's Day 2003.
Talk about it.
And she invited him. She asked him if he would do a reading with her for Mother's Day, and he agreed. So for Mother's Day, because I took my daughter, who I think was about 12 at the time.
And what was it like? What was the vibe? Keep telling us. What in what house?
Oh, it was a packed house. You know, it was a packed house. You know, it was a really positive vibe. It was, you know, a mother and a son who basically are poets. You know, I mean, he writes rap, you know, rap lyrics, but he's a poet. He's just as much a poet as his mother was. So it was interesting to see the two, you know, because there were different. She would be on, you know, one plane because of her, at her age at that time, and he's on another plane because of what it is he does. But it was a real positive collaboration on stage.
Did you feel a chemistry between those two different works?
Yes, they did have a chemistry at that performance. And it was very interesting. I think it was about an hour and a half, which is generous consider, you know, for those of you who don't, if you follow live music, like a set of live music usually only goes like 45 minutes before they switch to the next group of artists. So for her and Malik to be on stage for almost, you know, for an hour and a half, that's a real generous amount of time. So you really got a sense of her work versus his work. And you got a little sense of where they came together, you know, because she's very much into, as much as she's into family, she's also into the social issues that are going on around her. And he was very much into the social issues that were going on around him. So that was their, you know, meeting point.
I love that. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah.
And Cheryl was a social worker.
Yeah, she still is a social worker. She's retired from that now.
Right.
Yeah.
But why'd you remind us of that, Ron?
When EJ was talking about the social connections between, also, I mean, this is a completely side, and I haven't done enough research to build a conversation around it, but the importance of, and this goes back to my previous point, of artists who work for the city to supplement their art. I mean, there's a long history. I know Romare Bearden also worked and retired from working for the city, and Cheryl Boyce, and I know there are many others. I know artists, you know, today who are creating art, whether it's visual art or language, but they're also holding down these 9-to-5s through the city. So that's just kind of a separate conversation, but it's still an important one.
It is an important one, actually, because I had a hairdresser who also worked for Harlem Hospital through the city, and he always called it his good doing city job. Yeah. So they paid the bills with their good doing city job, and then they did their creative thing on, you know, their creative thing was, absolutely. And I think, you know, was their other job, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I want to name that a city job particularly, or a different sort of facet. I think most artists are in that, right? Not most. I think there's a narrative that when you pursue art as an artist, it's a false one, that like that is going to be how you live your life. Usually, particularly in the United States, artists
you got a job.
They're maintaining their jobs, their finances, their family structures primarily, and because it's in their soul, right? Because they have to, because it's a divine calling, because it's outside of them, really. But they have to be able to squeeze those things in. I'm sure we could say that about most of us sitting here, even in that facet, in that respect. We're poets, we're writers, we're thinkers, we're creators, we're painters, and we have jobs. You know, again, you know, I know I'm a baby, so I'm not gonna speak as though moment of experience. Oh, hey, Anna Banana. A moment of experience. But I did work in my young life, I've worked for the Department of Education for 8-9 years. And yeah, it almost crushed my soul because I was very influential in that age range and thinking, oh goodness, do I have to choose this over the art or the job? You know, and that's a young person problem, whatever. Again, it's not a violin. I'm just naming that relationship between having to maintain a sense of stability, particularly in the Black and brown body, and then having to be an artist. We all know that feeling. And if y'all feel comfortable, please can we talk about this with Cheryl next week? I think it's really important with us as working class people. Yeah. I don't pretend to know y'all business, but I know all of y'all work, you know what I mean? And we're here coming together in community. Some of us have book clubs outside of this creating, curating group. We all working, you know? And I think that for those of us that continue to write or love writing or continue to be in this community space, it would be great to ask her, how do we as working people continue that, go about that, take it to the next level? Granted, her circumstances, but I mean, Cheryl Boyce-Taylor was a writer and she had her art and her curations aside from her son, you know, as her name. So it's just a beautiful feeling, and thank you all for sharing that. I'm gonna be corny and go back into the pictures. I'm not being corny, I know. I really love them.
I bet you are being corny.
I'm being a little corny, but it's great. I think it's some of the stories that, again, we have this great chance to have this opportunity to look at the archive in a whole, right? We have the words and the image. So I just want to make sure we honor that as well. As we flip through, well, right now we just passed that Bowery scene, and then we have, I just think it's a gorgeous picture. I'm just gonna show it off. I have no deep thought. It's Malik's wedding. It's gorgeous, right? Goodness.
Where was it? Where did it take place?
In Trinidad. And it was just a beautiful. In Tobago, and it was a beautiful, beautiful. It seems like the family themselves are really content, you know, particularly Cheryl. You see her smile here. And for those of you that have experienced, whether again, we spoke about it last week, we all mother or experience the maternal sentiment, hopefully in these different ways, even if it's not through that mother relationship. And if you've ever been in that sentiment, you know that feeling of joy when you maybe feel like, oh, I can rest because either my child is locked up in their room and they're not going anywhere, or because my child has made this great decision, or because my child has reached that peak. You could see that joy in her face. Like she sees there's a peace there. Like, oh, I love that we're here. This feels like the right thing. That to me radiated from the page. Don't know how others see it. You know, my mama would be smelling too if I had her in a wedding in the sun. So. You know it. And then there's the acknowledgements page, but I would love for us to read the notes page on 117 aloud together. Because I think when I read the last poem, there was, believe it or not, a feeling of me. I was, you know, usually you read the end of a book and it just, you feel that wrap up. There's that little mini satisfaction. Oh, like, done with that. But when I got to the last poem, I felt like it wasn't done. And then when I read this notes page, I was like, wow, now this book is done. And let me just see how y'all feel about it. Maybe you didn't get a chance to read it. Notes is on page 117. The name Malik means master in Arabic. It also means king of kings and angel of God. In the Nigerian Yoruba tradition, twins are known as blessed spirits or Ibeyi. Malik was born. There are multiple Ibeyi, Ibeji. It's the J or the Y also. Some people, it's spelled with the J, but I've seen it with the Y as well. In the Nigerian Yoruba tradition, twins are known as blessed spirits or Ibeyi. Malik was born with a twin brother named Michael Boyce. Sadly, his brother only lived for 8 hours. Phife Dawg was born Malik Isaac Taylor to Cheryl Boyce-Taylor and Walt Taylor on November 20th, 1970 in St. Albans, Queens. He spent most of his early years traveling between New York and Trinidad. His parents' birth home In the early 90s, he co-founded the socially conscious hip hop group, A Tribe Called Quest. Together, the group changed the face of hip hop by creating 5 positive albums, which featured Afrocentric lyrics with strong jazz beats and an uplifting message. It has been very difficult, yet healing and enlightening to write this book about my son, Malik. For weeks after his death, I worried whether or not I had been a good mother to him. And I worried doubly about whether he knew how much I loved him. I don't know where that type of fear comes from. But after writing this book and recalling our life together, I realized what a big, amazing love we had. I will forever be grateful and thankful that he chose me and that I listened when at age 16, he said, "I'm leaving home, Ma. I'm gonna be a rapper." In this book, I have shared my deep sorrow and ongoing healing about the loss of Malik, better known as Phife Dawg of A Tribe Called Quest. Woven in between the losses are beautiful memories of Malik's childhood and his growth to becoming a hip hop icon. This is our story of faith, loss, and renewal. I wanted to read that aloud, and I wanted us to take a moment and just think about what does that look like in your life when you hear that faith, loss, and renewal. Sit in this for a moment. And the question I'm going to pose to you now, before even reading that sentence, did those 3 words or did those 3 feelings, did you feel that impact when you finished this or when you read this or throughout the pieces? Faith, loss, renewal. Were we able to recognize it? You know, most authors, that's a blessing. She's telling us this is what exactly you're going to get from this book. Particularly in poetry, poets don't tell you nothing. They'd be like, take my words, decipher them. I'm a genius. Goodbye. But she's telling us what she wants you to walk away with. And my question is, do those things come up for you?
%100% they do. I think everybody has experienced every single one of those things at some point in their life. However, they're intertwined. Yeah, and it's not only with the loss of a child or a death, it's just in general. Everybody, that resonates, I'm sure, with everybody in the world at some point in their life.
Simone, I thought we were going to take a couple people to get to the point I was trying to get to, but you did it right there, and I want you to delve in a little more. So she just said something so important, which was, oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. Oh my goodness, Paula, come on, don't do this. We're recording live. Oh, okay. That it doesn't matter if you've experienced the loss of a child. I know. Experience the loss of a child, right? Or someone in that relationship, but it's the idea of loss itself, right? That sentiment, we've all had it. And, you know, in reading this book, I was very cautious because I was like, I've lost people that I've loved. I've experienced loss. And I'm not going to begin to understand this sort of pain and this sort of loss. But I kind of walk away feeling like I do, because it doesn't just feel like the loss of a child. It feels like she's speaking to loss itself. And that's really the point I was trying to get to. Simone, do you want to add to that? Did I say it?
Nope, you said it very much the way it should have been said. You know, I know for me, I've gone through all kind of emotion with everything that she talked about in what you just read, you know, and it's just deep. It's deep that she can share, you know, what she's gone through with the world. And a lot of people can't do that. You know, a lot of us live our lives and we keep everything inside. Everything is bottled up inside. You know, we don't want to see people see us cry, and we don't want to see people see us go through the struggle, you know, but it's nice that she put it all out there, you know, everybody to see. So that in itself, you know, is challenging. Hopefully this book can help somebody else, you know, who may be going through what she went through, especially with the loss of a child. I couldn't even imagine what I would go through if something happened to my son. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. And then to be able to share it on top of that. Thank you, Simone. Well, I do want to take the opportunity particularly because we're not sure if we're going to have a super large group next week. It could be just us, the regular, schmegular Bronx people. And if that's the case, you know, I don't want to be yapping the whole time. So I want us to take a minute together as a group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I won't separate us into breakout rooms like I did before because it's really not that many of us. But we are going to do a sort of brainstorming exercise together, if y'all don't mind that. You want to ride the wave with Paula. So I want you to get a writing pencil. If it's if you have to yell at someone to throw it to you, if you have to walk away and grab it, please, you can do that. Something you can write with, a feather, a quill.
I just want to ask, how long ago from her son's death did she write the book?
It's 5 years this year.
Yeah, it's 5 years.
So
He
when
died
did
5 years ago.
So, and she just wrote the book?
I don't know when she started it.
Oh,
but
it just
it's
came
been
out.
published.
Okay, so, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
She could have been, that's a good point. She could have been writing it from that moment forward.
Yeah, she could have started it right away.
Yeah.
That's kind
So
of
that's
like,
an excellent question.
Mhm.
And
a place to explore her own personal healing.
Mm.
And you know how she dealt with the grief.
right. So if you have a writing utensil, hopefully you have a piece of paper, a napkin, maybe your book if you feel comfortable. This is a good annotation exercise to have in your book. I feel weird about annotate. Before we even do this exercise, hold on, I'm gonna stop my whole curriculum real quick. Let's take a poll because we could play a little bit. Nobody's here. I am so curious because I admire y'all all so much as writers and connoisseurs of stories. Who here is comfortable annotating in their books? Let's get into it. Who's here is comfortable writing in their book? Yeah, let's see a show of hands. Thank you. 1, 2. Great. Who here feels, oh no, I feel weird every time I write inside one of my books? Like I'm ruining it.
I'm kind of caught in the middle. I used to annotate all the time in the books, and then I became very self-conscious about it. Like, I don't know, I feel like I'm ruining it. So I went the complete opposite direction and would take it somewhere else.
Yeah, where does that shift happen? Because I think annotating is a necessary skill, you know, especially it's one of the best ways to interact with someone else's words. You just write your thoughts right next to it. But then, I don't know, I got this thing as I got older, like, I'm ruining my books. Like, where does that come from?
From your mother.
Yo, that's a fact. Just want Anna knows
comes from school. We've all
comes
been
from
programmed. Don't ruin your book. Somebody needs it next year.
That's true. That's true.
Brenda, thank you. Simone says, I'm on a digital copy, but if I wasn't, I wouldn't mind writing. I hope I read that in a good tone. If I wasn't, I wouldn't mind writing.
I think it depends on what kind of book it is, whether or not I annotate in the book. I mean, I didn't annotate in books up through high school, but because those school books belong to the school. But once you get to college, the college textbooks, you have to buy them.
Yeah.
So you analyze, you know, annotate and you highlight and you do all
and you spend all that money on the books. You do whatever you want.
You know,
draw pictures.
My poetry books, I don't tend to annotate in those.
Oh, yeah.
I might take notes in another, like in a journal or something, but I usually don't annotate in my poetry book. Although a lot of poetry books, if you notice, when you get to the end of them, they usually have about 4 or 5 blank pages in the back for the page count when they actually publish in the book. But those are good places to annotate if you want to write some notes or something about the book, you know, what you read or whatever in the back.
Absolutely.
Those last pages.
That reminds me of Olio as well. For those of us who were around when we were reading Olio, and the book itself is constructed so one can annotate. And we were all like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to pull these pages or write on here. And the book is literally made for that, right? So
yeah.
Thank y'all for being in this little conversation with me. I was just curious, you know, it's like tomato or tomato. Was someone saying something? Did I cut someone off?
I haven't got there yet, Paula, as far as writing in the book, but sometimes I do take notes and we'll leave the notes in the book. So some books I keep, and I donate a lot of books too. So, but I'm trying to get to the part where using highlighters and taking notes. I'm trying to get there.
Yes. Liliana says that she, you know, I write all over it, highlight it, you name it. Tack it, put a picture, put a sticker. Like, we're going to remember this is what we need. I will say that I too, Greg, I could really relate. I too used to annotate all the time. It was a sign that I loved the book. Like if someone had tried to borrow the book from me, I'll be like, well, look, you got a lot of my thoughts in there. And I will say that the more I started to teach to certain books and more teaching opportunities, even with book club, I'm sometimes worried that, you know, I don't want to see my thoughts while I'm talking to y'all. You know what I mean? I just want to have my thoughts while I'm experiencing it versus what I'm able to share is very different. Because sometimes I'll write something and I'll be like, what did I say? And that's what started to make me feel like I was messing up my books because it's just scribble scrabble and I don't even know what I'm writing anymore. All right, thanks for solving that with me, everybody. Here we go. We're gonna go back to this writing exercise. You know, in our notes, or in Cheryl's book, in the notes section that we just read aloud on page 117, again, she ends it with this being a story of faith, loss, and renewal. So if you're able, I just want you to make some space on a piece of paper, and you could make 3 columns, trace columns, just by drawing 2 straighter lines than I have, please, in the middle. And one could be named loss, the other one faith, and the other one renewal, in any particular order.
Lost, faith. Faith?
Renewal.
F-A-I-T-H?
Yes. And loss, like the loss, like grief. And then renewal. And we're gonna do a writing exercise together, and I'm actually gonna give you an awkward amount of time. You're gonna be like, oh, Paula, I don't need all this time. But I'm gonna ask you to push ourselves a little bit because we're together and there's not that many of us. And what I'd like you to do is think about 2 to 3, you could cap it at 2 if 3 is a lot, but if you're really inspired, then let me get 3. 2 to 3 questions for Cheryl, even if we don't read them with her and we don't share with them, let's share with her. Let's brainstorm together, right? They kind of maybe address those subcategories that I've created. Maybe you go into the poem and you say, hey, Cheryl, I read this poem. You go into the book and you say, I read this poem on page 69. And to me, that spoke to renewal. Can you talk more about that process, right? Like whatever it is, whatever connects to you. But we're going to take 5 minutes together as a group, maybe 6 if I keep on talking. And I just want you to write 2 to 3 questions under faith, loss, renewal. And before I set the timer, I kind of want to take the opportunity to ask, does this make sense? Does this exercise make sense to you? Does anyone have any questions? Should we clarify anything as a group before we move into it?
I am guilty. I don't have the book.
That's even better. Because we spoke earlier about the idea of you don't have to necessarily, no, because I'm going to explain to you why. You don't have to necessarily know the detailed story of what she's gone through in her loss. You as a person have gone through faith, loss, and renewal. So maybe it's just more about how does she write about these things, right? Doesn't have to be specifically about how we're reading it. Maybe you know other works that remind you and you want to ask her, have you ever read this? Have you ever seen this? Right? It doesn't have to necessarily just be what we've read. So that's a great question. And well, it wasn't a question.
Okay.
That was a great statement. Thank you, Anna. Anyone else?
Questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's start us off. Some of you started. I know you're writing faces. You ain't fooling me. Let's go. I'm going to give us 5 minutes on the clock. It's 7:52. Back at 7:56. And I would love to take your questions down so that maybe something happens, your internet stops in the middle of your question. Maybe you forgot. You were like, wow, I'm pulling up next week, but I don't know where I put this paper. Let me write down our questions so that whether you want to share them yourselves or you want to ask someone else, maybe in our group, to read the question for you, we can make sure we have enough to ask Cheryl. So whoever's comfortable, you could just start us off.
I have some questions. A question on faith. I wanted to ask, who did you lean on to get you through after his death? Also, did his death bring you closer to God?
Mm-hmm.
On loss, my question was, how did you deal with Fife's death other than writing this book? Or did this book, no, how did you deal with Fife after he died? And did you ever question why God took him, or wish you could have been there to help him more? Did you ever question your parenting? And as far as renewal, my question for renewal, other than the book, what else have you done to carry on his legacy? And how long did it take you to write this book? And do you have any other writing in the making or anything else that you want to do for the future to carry on your son's legacy? I know that was a lot, but.
No, these are recorded. I'm writing out the ones that stand out to me as well, because I'm also trying to hear if folks have questions that are similar, right?
Okay.
You know, we all think alike here. So that's beautiful. Thank you, Simone.
I have to get off at 8. It's okay. I'm just gonna maybe check a shot and read. I wrote 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the first, I'm not sure if it fits in any particular category. And actually it fits in all 3. How was your decision to marry during the earliest period after your son's death speak to your story of faith, loss, and renewal?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the second question was, how does the love you shared between your son and yourself both assuage your loss and deepen it at the same time?
Mm-hmm. It's such a tricky space to be in, yeah. I would love to see how she explains that to us. Before I move on, Anais, you know I love you. Have a beautiful night. I know you're hopping off. Let's say bye, Anais. We love you, bye.
Bye.
See you
Have a
next
great
week.
Bye, Annie.
Hasta luego.
That was awesome. Does anyone want to pick up from there? Yep.
I have a question. I like the poem. I don't know. I guess it's a poem, When Her Child Dies. And I think that falls in all 3 of the lost, faith, and renewal. When did she write it? How long after he died did she write that? And what is the 2? It has a 2 after in parentheses. What does that 2 stand for?
Mm-hmm. Because I think in the beginning of, doesn't it start with a When Your Child Dies poem?
Yeah, that's 2.
Oh, is it?
part of
Okay.
That's
So this
part
is the
2.
second one. Okay. And
all these things are valid. Yeah. How long did she write it? Mm-hmm.
right, how long after? And did she write any more poems?
Mm-hmm. Like, does she still write poems about him?
Exactly.
Or was this book like, you know, I'm gonna stop writing necessarily about him so intentionally? Yeah. Where? That's a great question. Thank you.
I know she has written, I believe, since his death. I'm not sure when Arrival, her previous book of poetry is called Arrival. EJ, do you know when Arrival came out? That was recent, right?
I don't think it's as recent as we think. Oh, let's see. This is probably around 2018 or 2017, somewhere in there.
Originally published in 2017, and then it won a poetry prize in 2018.
Yeah.
But she has been writing poetry since his death. Yeah.
But not about him necessarily.
Right. Well, that's the question, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's right. Like, is this a cap sort of on that? Because, you know, especially when you're a poet, I'll just take a moment and interject. I know you ain't asked me the question, but, you know, if you think about it, poets are something that I've heard a Willie Perdomo say one time aloud is that poets are constantly writing about the same thing until they don't anymore. So you're finding so many ways to talk about the thing, the moment, the issue, this scene in time. And you'll see many, many different poems about it until maybe one day that's not what you need to say anymore, right? That's no longer the truth. So that's why I'm so compelled with that question, because where is she in the truth of her grieving, right? Which I think is what we're really asking. And
it's endless.
Right. And how does it play into her art, if not as explicitly as like a book for him, right? How else is it playing into her art?
Yeah.
That's great. I'm adding a bunch of words we ain't need to, but y'all know me, I got a process. Okay. Anyone wants to pick up? They're coming in hot with these questions.
Yeah, I wanted to, go ahead, Ron.
You go ahead, Anna.
Age before beauty. No, let me stop. I wanted to, maybe you could help me like create this question, because I wanted her to explain or describe loss in general, and still with her, like, how people, when they lose a pet or, they feel, and then to compare it to the loss of her child, because my mother lost 2 children before she passed on. So I just, and I could never get it, they like go numb. And I was watching the YouTube that when you introduced this book. So I just, like there has to be some kind of difference, obviously, but if she would describe it or, and then I started saying, I don't want her to, go through it again. So I don't know if that's a good question.
Right, no, of course. Well, I think part of it, is that she seems like someone who tries to take care of herself, because this could be something that re-triggers her, especially if she exposes herself to community, right? Like it's one thing to write the book, but when she's saying, yeah, I'll come to your book club and I'll talk to people and I'll do interviews. So that's a great consideration. And part of me feels like that work is being done. And I don't think the question, well, again, I haven't lost, I won't say that, but I think there's a way to word that question that's attainable, right? So what I hear you saying really is just, how do you define loss versus the explicit grief in which you write about losing a child? What is it to experience loss versus losing a child, this specific thing? And I think that I look forward to how, she answers that. Does anyone, just because you brought it into the group, is anyone uncomfortable with that question being asked? Do folks feel like that's cool? If anyone's uncomfortable, we could talk about it.
She wrote a book about her grief.
Great point.
So I don't know how we can avoid asking her about her grief.
True.
Right. Well,
but
thank you.
The one loss that she touches on tangentially is the loss of Malik's relationship with a tribe called Quest, that near the end he had broken up, or the group had, broke up, and it was contentious. It seems like Q-Tip was, or maybe they all were moving in different directions. I don't know, I wasn't there. But how does that affect your health? I mean, he lived his entire life towards that one moment. As a little kid, he knew he wanted to rap. And he is one of a million who actually makes it there, to have a career as a rapper.
That's
and
true.
to lose, or as any kind of musician or artist, but to now lose that, I'm sure was quite traumatic for him, on top of his illness.
Right.
It could have triggered.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an amazing question and amazing connection. Yeah, how did those things affect him as he was moving into this other stage of his life too, right?
Because they weren't just like some little rap group,
No, they're the founders.
They were a huge stadium-filling rap group, So.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. And that's such a defining moment in his artistic identity, to not have that, to be pushed out of it. all of us can think of something you love to do or a work that you're really dedicated in. If you couldn't show up tomorrow and do that, right? Or if you couldn't write, or if you couldn't do your poetry or whatever that, if we couldn't have book club, if Ron couldn't hold space, how would that affect your mental health and your ability to do the things you like?
Mm-hmm.
And you're 100% right, because many years ago, before my son was born, I grew up in the world of a lot of old school rappers. And these guys are now in their 50s and pushing 60. And a lot of them say the same thing, who are not creatively rapping anymore because they're old now. You know, there's nothing else for me. The only thing I knew how to do was rap. You know, a lot of them didn't have a backup plan, you know, so that's it. Once the career is over, now you have to try to figure out a way to reinvent yourself as a 50 and 60-year-old rapper. And it's not easy. You know, some of these guys end up homeless, you know, because they just don't have the means and they're not making that money that they were making back then.
Yeah. And when you lose that part of your identity, that thing you're known for, how do you recreate or make it better? Yeah,
Yeah, so true. Can you imagine what it's like to be on the stage in the limelight? Everybody knows who you are, and you know, you rocking at that moment in that time, and then that's it. Your career is dead. Your career is over. And it's like, what do I do now? People only recognize you every now and then on the street because they're old school heads that know about that era of rap. These young kids don't know who you are if they see you on the street, unless they went back in the milk crates, you know what I'm saying, and pulled up your music. But it's mentally hard to kind of like try to grab what's going on now in the world of rap and music.
Yeah.
Right. And when you see those who have maintained a sense of relevancy but haven't necessarily been successful, it's because something else is going on, right? Because I'm just going to use these aren't my words, these are Simone's words. Don't come for me because I'm young, group. Simone said 50, 60 years old. I didn't say that. Okay. So with that said, I'm not, nope.
Wait. That's old for the rap.
No. I'm getting into it, but you know, I can't say that, Simone. So I'm just saying how you said it because I got this 2-year-old thing going on. I just don't want to get, you know, attacked.
All right.
But Simone's not saying anything bad. What we're naming is that in that age, around 50 and 60, you take someone like a Snoop Dogg. He's still had success all these years. But then you take someone who hasn't been able to really attain that success, but they've been relevant. And because aside from their iconic status, there's usually another problem going on there. And I'm really just alluding to DMX, right? But that's just like such a clear example, right? Of someone who had icon legend, Rough Riders themselves, or whatever that group is, similarly dismantled, groups pick up every day, right? And that was one of the biggest groups. We think about East Coast representation, blah, blah, blah. I won't give us a hip hop lesson today, but the point is that there are rappers or folks in art, I won't even say rappers, artists, who actually lose their lives and their mental health in these other really more self-deprecating ways, right? Like engaging in drugs and alcohol. And the fact that Phife couldn't really have control over his health. All he could really do was navigate it, right? It's a different, not that mental health and those other things aren't, but I think y'all know what I'm trying to say, and that this really came out of his control. And I wonder, how was he able to navigate that? Or if Cheryl was even able to see that at that time, you know? And then because you hear about DMX and you hear about other artists who lose their lives in different ways. And to your earlier point, Ron, I think hip hop creates that narrative sometimes, right? Like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to Simone? What is Simone saying? What are you gonna do when you're 50, 60 years old? And then I think about like athletes, particularly like football players, basketball players, which, you know, their retirement ages are, you know, young, given that they're abusing their bodies. And
they overpaid anyway, so.
But that becomes a reinvention. You know, that becomes a reinvention because you get overpaid for a certain amount of time until your body and all of those things that you've done to yourself don't outweigh, you know, the capitalism and the finance that you've acquired don't necessarily match the damage that you've done. So how do you reinvent yourself? You know, how do you, you know, we see athletes become advocates for certain things, but I think about Dwayne Wade and stuff like that. But the point is that narrative is often, it floats around in contemporary Black celebrity culture, the idea that like you are done by a certain age. Sorry, Ron, I saw you were going to say something.
That's all right. That's all right. One, I take exception that athletes are overpaid. I think they have a value, and that value, and the market dictates that value. there are many, many people making way more money than the athletes on the courts. So, or on the field.
Well, the
on
college
court.
athletes especially.
I think college athletes should be paid also.
Yeah, that they're being abused.
Yeah, I think they should be paid, but I don't know if pros are overpaid. That was just one thing, and that's personal. That's how I feel.
That's personal.
There's a TV show that I've been watching called Drink Champs.
Yeah.
Noriega.
Yeah, and it's a really good show. They just sit around with old school rappers drinking. But they're talking about who they are now, how their careers went and what's happening to them now and their success or failures. But sometimes they will interview, like they interviewed KRS-One for like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And he just sat there and talked about the battles and his finances and his likes and dislikes about contemporary hip hop. It's a really, other than that, they're drinking and smoking weed straight.
You don't have to watch that. Hold on.
Right.
So you don't have to watch that
don't
part.
focus on that part.
You could just hear it. You don't have to watch the video.
But it's a really interesting show. It's really interesting.
And I guess to name that, maybe I said all what I said earlier because I did watch the DMX podcast, the DMX Drink Champs episode, and it was that similar notion of he's explaining how, he had control over sort of his mental health and his illnesses, even though they extended beyond him. He made choices to extend that and to emphasize that. And that's why I thought about Phife in the moment, because I was like, wow, Phife wasn't even in that choice. I wonder how he was able to navigate his mental health, given that things were destroyed.
So his group broke up before he was ill or while he was ill?
It broke up while he was ill.
Yeah, it aligned.
He had type 1 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it broke up while during that time period. It was like when he, was really dealing with it and on dialysis and whatnot.
Wow.
The group itself, they grew up together. So they're more like brothers than they are just friends. And so when the group broke up, somebody wasn't talking to Q-Tip and blah, blah, back and forth. They have a whole documentary on this, by the way, that premiered in New York a few years ago, where they talked to each member of the group and what things were happening then. But by the time of his passing, they had kind of put all of that behind them. They were in the studio actually coming back together. They were doing a new album.
Oh, wow.
Phife was doing, and Malik was doing his own solo album at the same time.
I would name, just because things were positive though, doesn't mean that there wasn't an impact between those relationships.
Oh, no. They have an impact. Obviously they would have an impact, but by the time of his passing, they had figured out a way, like any other family,
to come together, right?
to pull it back, to pull themselves back together and to be, each of them had matured in their own way while they were separated.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of figured out how to pull that back together, how to pull it back together so that they were all on speaking terms and they were actually working together and hanging out together, that kind of thing.
That's a good thing.
By the time he actually passed.
Mm-hmm.
And Malik did have a lot of other interests. He was actually maybe a lot of people don't know it. At the time of his passing, he was a diehard basketball fanatic, and so all of the sportscasters knew him. So he was doing things in that vein of designing things and doing all kinds of stuff in that. So he used, just like Cheryl introduced him to a lot of different things that we found out about in this book. he started using all of those other creative outlets that he had for himself.
So that takes us to a further question of then how did that impact who he could have reinvented himself to be, right? If we're naming that EJ knows that these relationships were positive in a particular way, then how does that navigate the dreams of who he thought he could be toward the end of his life, right? What are those thoughts, right? Like, and again, versus, you know, I don't know how many truths she'd actually be willing to share with in his personal life on that level, but hopefully there's a way to get her to talk a little bit about like the difficulty in that, you know?
Well, I think we could legitimately ask her, okay, well, we know the group broke up.
Yeah.
How did Malik navigate that? What did he do when there was no group?
Yeah.
And I'm sure she'll answer that question. I think she would answer.
Great. I love it. Hold on.
Where did the name Phife come from? Because I didn't read the book. So is it in the book?
I don't remember if it's in this.
It's a play on 5-footer.
Yeah.
Like, cause he was short. I think that's where it comes from. Like it's a shortened version of 5-footer.
5-footer? That's cute.
Because he was like 5'3" or something. So he was short.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was short.
And I think that's where it comes from.
Okay.
5-footer.
5-foot assassin. That's one of Phife Dawg's most famous lines in every Tribe Called Quest song. He introduces himself as the 5-foot assassin.
Oh.
Okay, I want to make sure or at least get a moment to jot down anyone who thought of questions that they really were like, hey, I want to name this and I want to share. So I'm going to take the next 5 minutes or less to make sure we have that. Is there any other question that we've shared as a group that didn't come up, or maybe it relates for you?
Was she a woman of God?
Yeah,
Cheryl? Yes.
Okay. All right. So the question was asked.
Let's ask her that directly.
I have sort of a question. So this is referring to page 62, the poem called Dear Malik. There's a line where she says, I am sorry for, I'm sorry for being a mother to you. And I am questioning, why is she apologizing for being a mother? So I'm not sure if that's relevant or not, but I just thought that was very interesting, that language in that.
Yeah.
You're referring, for those that don't have the book,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I'm just going to read it because it's short so people can know. We're referring to page 62. Dear Malik, forgive the years when as a teen I became your mother. Forgive me when I disrespected you. Forgive me when I failed to listen. Forgive the years when you felt like an unloved teen, dull without your mother's shine. Forgive the wound that broke you from throat to fractured toe. Forgive me. Love, Mom. So
Yes, I was just questioning like why that specifically for her, she had to apologize for that.
Yeah.
And if she ever did talk about things that she felt that she, disrespected him during his teen years, I'm sure, sometimes as being a parent, obviously teens is not the best age group. So I've been there. We all.
Yeah, we all.
And then the other question was similar to Anais when she went on a trip to Mexico, and I was wondering how that trip brought any closure for her, and also like the decision to get married. How did that? I'm looking for the word, but how did that help her process?
I guess,
yeah. Like, and I also wonder, I don't know if this is might to be too much, but was she afraid, or what was holding her back from getting married while her son was alive with her partner? But that might be too personal, so that's why I might not.
Well, hopefully she's really open and naturally goes into those things, because I think you're asking her, because when we think about healing, we think about the steps that we have to take. So really it's just like, what made you take those steps? So even if she doesn't say, this is why I didn't, right? I think what you're asking really is just how did it happen? How were you able to move in that? And your question about, so I thank you, I love that. And your question about motherhood, yeah, I think, because what I hear in that too is, even though she may name the reasons why she, you know, she's saying, oh, I'm sorry for not being loving, or I'm sorry for this specific thing. I think it'd be great to hear from her, what are the points and insecurities in which one begins to question their motherhood? You know, what are the turns? What are the stories? What are the memories that she has that makes her go, oh, wow, you know? And if she'd be willing to share that. So thank you.
Also, I know that even though Cheryl got married after Malik's death, she was with her partner for some time. So I don't know if there's like intentional timing around that, other than, you know, they as a couple just came to that decision. That I don't know, but she has been with the same person for a while, I believe.
Right, which I think emphasizes Liliana's question, honestly, because then it's like, how clearly the death of her child, like we named before, there's an impact then in how we move and what we do. And all of a sudden, to not be married for so long, how do you choose happiness in that way and say, you know what, we're gonna get married? You know, what is that choice if she's willing to tell us respectfully? No, I think it's because we've all been there, yeah.
That's her renewal, maybe.
Definitely, I think when Liliana and Anais were saying that, it was sort of like in that trip to Mexico toward that renewal process. How did you choose that, right? Which is an excellent question. With 6 minutes left on the clock, I'm gonna have one more minute to see if there's any other thing that's sticking out. Also, don't put this in the back burner of your mind all the way, right? Like maybe questions will come after we speak, and you're definitely gonna have those opportunities. But is there anything else? And I'm gonna go back and look at the recording, even though I hate watching myself do all this, but I wanna make sure I get everyone's questions clearly. Is there anything else?
This is actually not a question, it's more like a comment. I didn't have the book either. Okay. And I just simply went on the library, the New York City Public Library, and downloaded the book. It took 2 seconds to do it, and they download through a free app called Hoopla that I guess the library uses, and that's it. It took like 2 minutes. So that's just for future reference for anyone out there who doesn't want to buy the book or can't find the book.
You need the library card number?
Yep, I downloaded it like a couple of hours ago and just started reading it real quick before we got online.
No, I know, but do you need to download? Do you need to have an ID number for the
library card number?
You do. You need you need a library card. So just go get a library card, and that's it. And you can download all these books we've read so far.
That's great. Thank you, Simone.
What's the app? I'm sorry. What's the app called?
Hoopla, Hoopla. It's free of charge. And the library will take you to the app when you want to download an ebook. It'll bring it up for you to download Hoopla. That's it, the Hoopla app. It's free, no money, no nothing.
Beautiful. I love a resource.
And we do encourage we do encourage you to, you know, purchasing books every month can add up. So go to the library, download books, you know, from the library. We definitely encourage you to do that. You know, there's some books that you might buy and you don't like, and then you're mad at me because you know, you bought it for the book club.
We'll donate it to your library.
I won't tell you which ones, but I definitely know that situation. So therefore,
but definitely support the local library.
That's great.
I saw, Barbara, you had a question. Was I mistaken?
I'm honestly not sure if this is a question for her particularly or just for the group as a general, but I'd like to point out her poem, or I don't know what it is, on page 78, April 4th. I guess that's the day he died, or actually that is the day he died. I don't understand, or maybe I would like to know what other folks think about taking pictures at a funeral and taking pictures of the person that passed away in their casket. I don't know if that's a question for her. I really don't. But I have been in funerals that people actually take pictures. And I don't know how I feel about it. I personally don't have an opinion about it. I feel maybe that might be disrespectful, but then I also feel like if that's your loved one, then what, I don't know, what is the harm in it? But I would feel disrespected if like someone from the street came in and did it, like didn't know or whatever. I would feel kind of awkward with that. But that's like a one comment / question. I don't know.
Oh, something we have to keep. I'm sorry, Barbara. I don't want to cut you off.
No, and I just had one other thing, that her distinction, and that's on the very next page, her distinction on April 5th, she said she compared or thought about his death and Martin Luther King's death. And then when I read, I was like, wow, it's like exactly 48 years later to the day that he passed away. So I thought that was not a question, but just, you know, a good observation.
Yeah, but to address your point about taking pictures of the casket, we have to remember that Malik is a celebrity, and that's not unusual for people, to his fans, quote unquote, that come in and take pictures.
So in this, yes, you're absolutely right, and I completely agree. But in this sense, it was the dad that did it, and she was very upset. Like she said, your father takes a picture, poses himself in front of the open casket, and I want to crack that, mother. So how dare he take a picture of our child in his casket? What good father does that?
Right.
So that was kind of like, oh wow, that's the actual parent doing it.
Yeah.
So like I said, I don't know if that's a question for her. I don't even know if that really is a question. It was just a comment, really, an observation.
Right.
That I don't know how other people feel about stuff like that.
Thank you for bringing that to the group attention, because and for time, I'm going to name that there, like everything we've named, there is a way to ask these things. Well, what the question I hear in the statement, if I may, the one that you're making, or in the observation that we're seeing here, is how does the relationship with Phife's father at the time really emphasize and navigate her grief? What does it look like for her to work through that, create through that? You know, she's even telling the story of her grief using her anger toward him. This is not the first poem in which we feel like she's pissed at him. Yeah, so I would love to just know just more about, like, she mentions her relationship with Walt, and, you know, what does it look like for her? You know, because she shared kind of how it impacted the grieving. So what does it look like to really navigate? So I think that's a great question.
And not to mention, did he have any ill will in taking that picture? Because now we live in a world and society where everybody does things when it comes to celebrities, and things are sold to tabloids. People are looking to make money. Even families are now doing things to make money off of other family members because they're a celebrity. So you just never know what people's intentions are nowadays when they do stuff like that.
Yeah, she seems very protective and possibly even territorial over her son, and therefore that opportunity to not trust dad then lends to those other things. So I love that. So we can definitely ask about that. I don't want to take up y'all Tuesday because I've taken up all of the Tuesday nice sun, and now it's nighttime. I love you all so much.